Love you right back. I have to start with a couple of things, because I know a lot of people who are here, and I've told the story 1,900 times, so I'm going to tell it one more time so I don't have to say it. I am not permanently disabled. This thing is new to me, and if I fall over, I'll do it with dignity, I promise. I had surgery about a month ago, and I made the doctor promise that I'd be up and able to do this for you guys. So occasionally I can actually sort of lay this down, but I've also promised my doctor that when I'm in large open spaces with a possibility of falling over on anybody, no threats, that I will use it so that I don't fall over. But I'm going to be fine in a couple of weeks, God willing. You know what the toughest part is? I have to sleep with this thing on. So my bed is 19 pillows at my feet and one at my head, trying to find a comfortable position. The other thing I wanted to do is, I am told, and I don't know that this is 100% accurate, but I'm pretty sure it would be, that Lutherans are pretty thin on the ground in Newfoundland. Well, I'm sure there might be a Lutheran or two in Newfoundland, there's just not a Lutheran congregation. Am I right? Somebody who knows? Okay. Now, I also know then that there are a group of Newfoundlanders here who are the first home team group ever to come to a national gathering from Newfoundland. So for them, God guard thee, God guard thee, God guard thee, Newfoundland. There you go. Give it up for Newfoundland. Seriously, I'm telling you, I've been to Newfoundland a bunch of times. I've never had so much fun in my life. I've kissed the cod, I've eaten fish and chips at Chess's, I've been to Trinity Bay, I've done the whole thing. Go, and don't miss the kitchen parties. Today, I have set the bar impossibly high for myself. Today is the parable of the talents. You've heard it read. And it is one of the toughest of Jesus' parables. And quite frankly, I've done this to you because I trust you. One of the problems I think we have in the church is that we don't trust young people enough with the most difficult sayings of Jesus. And this parable is tough. Why? Well, because it ends with that fantastic phrase, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Any of you weep or gnash your teeth? Anyone else been cast into outer darkness where you weep and gnash your teeth? Wow. Crickets. Okay, well, it's a difficult parable. And one of the things that I want you to understand is there are always different ways of understanding the parables. What I'm doing with you is one way of understanding them. It's one way of looking at and interpreting the parables. It's one way of understanding and challenging yourself with what's here. So don't think that I have the final answer. I don't. There are other answers to this parable. But, and this is the whole point, remember when we talked about the treasure in the field and the pearl of great price? We learned there that both interpretations can be true at different times in your life, in different contexts, different situations. So even though one interpretation may not fit for you now, it may fit for you later. The other thing I want to remind you of is our 3 rules. Do you remember what they are? 1, the gospel is always, and if you're not astonished, number 2, the gospel is never, because if it were fair, it wouldn't be about grace, which is when you get what you don't deserve. Let's try that again. When you get what you don't deserve. Or mercy, which is when you don't get what you do deserve. Okay? And the third rule is that God always acts. Thank you. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The things you learn from the parables are not always right in front of you either. They're little surprises, things you think about as you're reading. Have you ever, well, I'm sure you've read any other story and think, why the heck would someone do that? Or what's that all about? So those kinds of thoughts are actually very important to you when you're studying a parable. And when Jesus taught, it's those things that the crowd around him instantly got. They just understood it. They usually chuckled to themselves because they understood what Jesus was trying to say. He was setting it up so that everyone in the room knew what was being said, but it didn't need to be said. It's the stuff, the biggest news in the parable is the stuff that everyone just kind of got. Are you with me? It's the hidden stuff. Like cultural references. If I make a reference to The Simpsons, or my favorite character, Ralph Wiggum, okay? This is a Ralph Wiggum quote, and everyone who knows, if I had just said this without mentioning The Simpsons or Ralph Wiggum, most of you would have understood it. My cat's name is Mittens, okay? Or, ooh, nap time, that's where I'm a pirate, okay? Those are Ralph Wiggum quotes, and everyone who's a fan of The Simpsons will get it. I would quote Family Guy, but this is kind of family time, if you know what I mean. I'm a big fan of Stewie Griffin, but that's a whole nother evil empire. Yeah. The other thing about the parable of the talents is it's a financial parable. It talks about money. And Lutherans, something you need to know about Anglicans. Okay? We're cheap. The great Anglican credo, the unwritten one, it's not in the prayer book. You ready for this? Don't touch me. Don't ask me for money. And for God's sake, don't tell me about Jesus. That's the great Anglican credo, which is kind of ironic when you think about it. But this is a talent. The parable of the talents is actually a financial parable. So we have to start with, what the heck is a talent? You and I have probably all survived numerous mind-numbingly dull sermons, badly done sermons, in which they equate the word talent with your ability to play clarinet, or to be a cheerleader, or to plant gardens or something. Some gift which you have, and that the way this whole parable is then spun out is that you've got to be the best clarinet player you can be for Jesus. How many of you have sat through a sermon like that? Clap, I can't see you. Thoroughly awful. It's, you can read it that way. You can read it that way, but it's not the way I think it's meant to be read. So what's a talent? A talent is a measure of money. It's the largest measure in Roman accounting. It is a measure of silver by weight, and it's 7,300 silver pennies. Okay? It's the usual daily wage. Same coin for 20 years. Okay? A talent is 20 years' wages. So 1 talent, with my keen analytical mind and my iPad, I went on to the interwebs and I looked up what a modern talent would be. What's a talent worth? It's $1.15 million. Okay? $1.15 million, that's 1 talent. So when we go back to this story, slave 1 gets 5 talents. $5.75 million. Slave 2 gets $2.3 million. And slave 1 gets 1.15. Now, this is the point at which you ask yourself the underlying questions. Okay? This is how you make Bible study interesting. What kind of a boss gives that kind of cash to slaves? What kind of a boss, remember, these are slaves. In this parable, the way Jesus tells it, these are people who don't even earn the usual daily wage. They're not laborers. These are slaves in the household. They don't get the penny a day we talked about yesterday. They just work. And they work for their master. They work for their keep. And that's it. What kind of a master gives that kind of cash to people who could run away with it? That's the first question that maybe ought to pop up in your mind when you read the parable of the talents. We are not dealing with a normal master here. So the story goes on. Each of the slaves is handed their sum of money. Outrageous amounts of money. The other thing is, and I want you to get a visual here, they didn't have checks. There was no little piece of papyrus payable to the Imperial Bank of Jerusalem. So slave number 1 walks out with 5 wheelbarrows of little silver coins. Think about it. The folks in the crowd, okay, you're not Jerusalem, but the folks in the crowd will be chuckling to themselves by now. How do you get 5 talents worth of silver out to the market? Well, wheelbarrows. Slave number 2 has 2 wheelbarrows full of silver, and slave number 1 has 1 wheelbarrow of silver, and they are each sent out with the money because the master's going away. They're each sent to invest. And this wonderful phrase from Scripture, each according to their ability. And what happens? Well, for slave number 1 and slave number 2, fantastic things happen. The returns are wonderful. Okay, I realize most of you are pretty young. Some of you may have some investments, but if anyone here can let me know where I can get 100% return on my investments, call me. I want the stock tip. That's exactly the answer. It's the only place you get 100% return. Five talents make 5 more. 2 talents make 2 more. But the slave with 1 the slave with 1 talent just did not get it. He didn't understand. But why? Why the epic fail? Why? Well, we asked the question, what kind of a master? What kind of a master gives this kind of money to people who could run away? Well, we know this about the master. It's a master who trusts. He knows his slaves. He trusts them. He accepts that they have abilities and that they will do their best. But there's another side to that coin. What do you say, or what do you think? How well did the slaves know the master? Well, the first 2, I think, knew him pretty well. But the 3rd slave, another epic fail. Another epic fail. Why? Well, do you remember what he said? When the master called for an account, he said, I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you didn't scatter seed, and I was afraid. So I went and I hid your talent in the ground. So here, you have what is yours. This is where the slave failed. It's not that the slave really meant to screw up, but he didn't really know his master very well. Because how harsh must a master be to give one guy $5.75 million and say, go nuts? And another one, 3, and say, go nuts. He was afraid. And that fear kept him from doing what he could with what the master had given him. Now it's time to play with the parable. Remember, I've all given you permission. From now on, drive your pastors and priests crazy. After sermons on Sunday, if it's a parable, I want you back in their face at the back door saying, but what if? Are you with me? Will you do it? Oh, come on. Will you do it? All right.